Could you imagine that one of the largest aircraft manufacturers in the world is Brazilian? That this company from the land of the samba, the canarina, and the permanent carnival surpasses any producer in Asia and leads the global market for regional aircraft by far? Well, this is exactly the case with Embraer, a giant of the skies whose shares have taken off as much as its aircraft in the last year. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Its dollar shares have soared almost 75% in the last 12 months. And if we look further back, things are even better. In the last 5 years, Embraer's dollar-denominated shares have appreciated by almost 700%. This means that they have multiplied by more than 8 times in just 5 years. Crazy. That means an annualized return of over 50%. I've already said that the shares were taking off, and in a way, the company is going like a rocket. It has had a hard time recovering from COVID-19, but now it's starting to run at full speed. And at this point, I have to digress. As you probably know, the global aviation market is essentially a duopoly between Airbus and Boeing, with the European brand, by the way, giving a real beating to its American rival in recent years. However, although it's not usually taken into account, just below them appears today's protagonist. In 2024, Embraer delivered a total of 206 aircraft, mostly to the United States, where 60% of all its sales go. So when we talk about Embraer, we're talking about a giant with more than 21,000 employees, the world's #1 manufacturer of regional aircraft for up to 150 passengers, one of the most important private aviation companies with more than 1,900 jets delivered, and also, increasingly, a major international supplier of military transport aircraft. We're talking about a company that Boeing itself wanted to acquire a few years ago, with an operation that ended up becoming another resounding failure, one more for the American manufacturer. Now, how is it possible that a country like Brazil has managed to nurture the third largest civil aviation company on the planet, surpassing even the manufacturers of Russia and China? How does this company make money? And I can already tell you that its main source of profitability is not precisely the sale of airplanes. Well, pay close attention to what we're going to tell you next, because we're going to learn a lot about one of the most fascinating stories in the world of aviation. And first things first, let's start at the beginning.
Beginning to take to the skies.
How can a country like Brazil become one of the world leaders in the aviation world? Let's see, and don't get me wrong, Brazil is a great power in many respects. But the aviation industry? That's serious. This industry is considered one of the most complex and difficult industries in existence. Many countries have tried to break through, and most have failed. And yet, there it is. The best performing aviation manufacturer on the stock market in recent years is a Brazilian. Well, to understand the origin of this company, we have to go right back to the 1940s. At that time, Casimiro Montenegro Filho, a prominent Brazilian military engineer and aviator, visited the United States and visited MIT, the prestigious technological university in Boston. And what happened next? Well, basically, he wanted to copy the model in Brazil itself. Well, no sooner said than done. What's more, in this case, he did it twice. On the one hand, in 1950, he founded the Instituto Tecnológico de Aeronautica, ITA, in the image of MIT, with the aim of training top-level engineers. And then, shortly thereafter, in 1953, he also pushed for the founding of the Department of Aerospace Science and Technology, the DCTA, a research and development center focused on aeronautics and space, the perfect complement to the ITA. Training and research at the highest level. In fact, they brought in a lot of engineers and professionals from abroad. They even convinced a leading MIT professor, Richard Haybert, to lead these projects. This move was a success. The two centers quickly became two of the most prestigious institutions, not only in Brazil, but in all of Latin America. They are even widely recognized around the world today. So the question is, what on earth does any of this have to do with Embraer? Well, let's see. Logically, if we're talking about the ITA of the DCTA, it's for a reason. And that is that in 1969, ITA alumni promoted the creation of Embraer to produce and commercialize a prototype aircraft developed precisely by the DCTA. In other words, in this case, the advanced training and research centers were set up first, and then the manufacturer emerged from this work. Embraer emerged as a state-owned company closely related to the other two institutions. Each of them is located just over a 10-minute drive from the other two, and as you can imagine, both ITA and DCTA have since served as a sort of huge quarry for the Brazilian giant. Well, the fact is that Embraer emerged to market this small aircraft you see on the screen, the EMB-110, a simple transport aircraft for both the armed forces and civil aviation, an economical aircraft for use in areas, for example, with poor infrastructure. And in this regard, I have to say that this Brazilian company has made a couple of pretty smart decisions. On the one hand, Embraer decided to specialize in this small type of aircraft. That is, they sought to achieve a maximum speciality that would allow them to sell to the rest of the world and be very competitive. They did not want to compete head-to-head with the big American manufacturers. No big and ambitious projects. No, they always understood that they had to look to lead a very specific market niche, and that is exactly what they did. And then, on the other hand, they understood their limitations. So instead of going it alone, they sought to partner with foreign manufacturers, and it worked. It really worked. By 1989, their revenues were already equivalent to approximately $1 billion adjusted to year 2000 values. They exported half of their production to the rest of the world, and the company had more than 2,500 workers. However, the entry into the 90s was to change everything. The Brazilian economy collapsed. Crisis, recession, hyperinflation, the whole package. Then to top it off, the US market also had some bad years at the same time, and Argentina emerged on the scene. Yes, you heard correctly, Argentina. You see, in the early 1980s, the governments of Brazil and Argentina promoted a strategic partnership between Embraer and the FMA, the Fábrica Militar de Aviones, an Argentine government-owned manufacturer to develop new aircraft. And as you can probably guess, the collaboration was a complete failure. The developments were too expensive, and they were not able to produce aircraft that were internationally competitive. A disaster. So between one thing and another, between the Brazilian crisis, between the US aviation crisis, and the partnership with Argentina, Embraer's sales began to plummet. Its catalogue was becoming obsolete. And as I said, the efforts with the Argentine company to develop new aircraft were a failure. At this point, Embraer's future looked bleak. The Brazilian company was on the ropes, and in fact, even had to get rid of most of its workforce. Its time seems to have come to an end. Nevertheless, the best was yet to come. As you can see, from the mid-90s onwards, everything suddenly changed, and the company began to grow like there was no tomorrow. And this has a lot to do with something that happened in 1994. Any idea what we're talking about? Well, you see, in 1992, the economic situation in Brazil was so bad that inflation was approximately 1,100%, and in 1993, it was even worse, 2,477%. That's serious hyperinflation. The situation was a disaster. And so, in an attempt to find a solution, in 1993, the Brazilian president, Itamar Franco, appointed Fernando Henrique Cardoso as the all-powerful finance minister, a guy who would later become president of Brazil, and who has gone down in history as one of the most successful politicians in the history of this country. Well, the fact is that shortly after his arrival at the ministry, he promoted the so-called Real Plan, an economic stabilization plan. And what does this all have to do with our protagonist today? Well, based on this plan, the Brazilian government privatized this company in 1994. And trust me, that was a real turning point. Privatization injected a lot of new capital and, logically, gave the Brazilian company a lot of freedom to decide and act. For example, it allowed them to outsource many low-value added activities in order to focus on the most valuable parts of the production process. And it also redoubled its commercial bet. Clearly, it had to be profitable because it was now private. Well, that's when Embraer decided to start making regional jets for up to 150 passengers, with the idea of capturing a North American market that, at the time, was dominated by old turboprops that were very inefficient in fuel use. And guess what? This decision would forever change the history of the company. Within a few years, it became the world leader in this segment, a position it has not relinquished to this day. These days, you can find Embraer aircraft flying regional routes all over the world. Embraer aircraft rank just below the Boeing 737, and the smaller Airbus 320 in size and capacity. This, the regional aviation market, is a market that curiously began being dominated by European manufacturers, then by Canada's Bombardier, and finally by a long shot by Embraer. Well, that's how we get to 2019, when Boeing tried to buy the commercial division of this Brazilian group for more than $4 billion. However, in the end, faced with the resistance of the Brazilian government, the pandemic, and the 1001 problems of the American manufacturer, everything fell apart, and Boeing ended up paying $150 million in compensation in 2024. And the truth, seeing the stock market performance of Embraer, thank goodness for the Brazilian manufacturer shareholders that the operation did not go ahead. So, now that we know how Brazil has become a power in the skies with this company, let's see exactly how it makes money. And take note, there's a surprise here. Pay attention.
4 in 1.
Embraer currently has 4 major divisions. Firstly, there's the commercial aviation, the regional aircraft I was talking about a moment ago. Here, its portfolio is dominated by E-jets, which have been a huge success in the United States, and of which the Brazilian company has started to sell the second generation. Very efficient, low-noise aircraft with very low maintenance costs. Well, in 2024, they delivered some 70 aircraft and billed just over $2.2 billion. And take note, because there are those who say that given all the problems Boeing is having, Embraer could try with a larger aircraft. We'll have to see. Then, secondly, we have business aviation, the private jets. And note that among its light jets, Embraer has had the world's best-selling aircraft for 13 consecutive years, the Phenom 300E. They also have the Praetor 500 in their portfolio, which is considered the fastest and longest-range medium jet in the world. This has earned it 40% of the world market in this segment. In total, they delivered 130 jets in 2024 and have now announced that they expect to deliver 170 per year through 2028. In other words, if you're in the market for a jet, you will probably end up looking to Brazil. Be that as it may, the point is that in 2024, they had a turnover of $1.76 billion with this division, which is growing steadily. In terms of military aviation, Embraer has one of the most fashionable military transport aircraft in the world. I'm talking about the C-390 and its tanker version, KC-390, an aircraft designed to carry up to 26 tons, which beats its rivals in speed and range and is receiving a lot of orders from all over the planet. They also manufacture the A-29 Super Tucano, a small light attack fighter for which they have more than 290 orders. In 2024, they had a turnover of $721 million. But this is a very promising division for the coming years, thanks in particular to the C-390, which continues to win contracts. And finally, we have the service, training, simulators, repair and maintenance division, which, guess what? This is by far the most profitable of the entire company. Embraer makes much more money from the maintenance and repair of aircraft than from their sale. In fact, as you can see, it is the jewel in the crown. More than 40% of all operating profit comes precisely from this division, which is also the fastest growing of the entire group. Curious, don't you think? Well, with all this, we have a company that trades at a price-earnings ratio of about 22 times, and almost 10 times enterprise value, or EBITDA. What does this mean? Well, the market is not taking into account that this Brazilian giant of the skies will continue to grow at full speed in the coming years. In fact, the company is expected to almost double its revenues by the end of the decade. That is, to continue to grow at over 13% per year. And if they succeed, in that case, we could be talking about a net profit of almost $1 billion per year. Be that as it may, the company is trading cheaper than Airbus and Boeing and has no debt. So if you're thinking of investing in this sector, then perhaps this is a useful asset for you to take a closer look at. So there you have it. This is the amazing story of what is surely the greatest industrial success in the history of Brazil. The question is, did you know about Embraer? What do you think about its origin story? And do you think we can learn something valuable from this process? Let us know what you think in the comments. Now, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. All the best. See you next time.